27th March, 1945. The village of Iserlohn lies somewhere ahead, beyond the grey haze of a Westphalian morning. A column of Sherman tanks idles at a crossroads, their engines coughing blue exhaust into the cold air. The crews have been here before, not at this exact crossroads, but at this exact feeling. The feeling of knowing that whatever waits beyond the ridge might be faster, better armoured, and better armed than the machine they are sitting inside. For nearly 6 years, this had been the quiet, terrible arithmetic of armoured warfare on the Western Front. The Germans had the Panthers, they had the Tigers, and the British, for all their engineering ingenuity, had been sending men into battle inside tanks that everyone, crews, commanders, and generals alike, privately knew were outclassed. But on that March morning, something new was arriving. Not at the front, not yet. It was being unloaded from transporters at a depot further west, its angular hull still bearing the faint chalk markings of the production line in Leeds. It weighed 52 tons. Its gun could penetrate any armour the Germans had ever built, and its designers had spent 4 years solving a problem that had haunted British tank doctrine since the fall of France. The Centurion had arrived. It was 6 weeks too late for the war it had been built to fight, and it would spend the next 6 decades fighting every other one. This is the story of how Britain finally built the tank it always should have had, why it took so long, and why the answer to that question says everything about the nature of wartime engineering under pressure. To understand why the Centurion mattered, you have to understand what came before it, and how consistently, almost impressively, the British Armoured Corps had been let down by its own machines. The problem was not lack of effort. The problem was doctrine. For much of the War Office maintained a distinction between two kinds of tank: the infantry tank, built slow and heavily armoured to support foot soldiers across open ground, and the cruiser tank, built fast and lightly armoured for exploitation and pursuit. It was a logical distinction on paper. In practice, it produced machines that were either too slow to be useful or too thin-skinned to survive. The Valentine was reliable but underpowered. The Matilda was nearly impervious in 1940 but swiftly obsolete. The Crusader was fast and broke down constantly. The Churchill was dependable but mounted a gun that could not reliably defeat a Panzer IV at standard combat ranges, let alone the Panther that began appearing in large numbers from 1943 onwards. The Sherman, the tank that would eventually equip the majority of British and Commonwealth armoured units, was an American solution to a different problem. It was easy to produce, easy to maintain, and reasonably effective against German tanks of 1942. By 1944, it was dangerously outclassed. German crews called it the Tommy Cooker. British and American crews had their own names for it, none of them printable. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. The frontal armour of a standard Sherman measured roughly 76 millimeters at its thickest point, sloped moderately. The Panther's frontal hull measured 80 millimeters but angled at 55 degrees, the equivalent, in terms of effective protection, of nearly 140 millimeters of vertical steel. The Sherman's 75mm gun could not reliably penetrate this armour at any combat distance. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42, by contrast, could defeat a Sherman's front plate at over 1,000 meters without difficulty. The men who climbed into Sherman's every morning in Normandy and the Low Countries knew this. The generals knew it too. And the question, why had Britain not built something better, had been asked with increasing urgency since at least 1942. The answer, when it finally came, emerged from a relatively small design team, working under the directorship of the Department of Tank Design, based primarily at Chobham in Surrey, with manufacturing contracted to AEC, Leyland, Rolls-Royce, and the Royal Ordnance Factories across the north of England. The project that would become the Centurion had its formal origins in a General Staff specification issued in late 1943, designated a 41. The specification was, by the standards of previous British tank procurement, almost revolutionary in its clarity. It called for a single universal tank, not a cruiser, not an infantry tank, but a vehicle that could perform both roles. It would be fast enough to exploit a breakthrough and armoured enough to survive a direct confrontation with the heaviest German tanks then in service. The lead designer was a man named Claude Gibb, supported by a team at the Fighting Vehicles Research and Development Establishment. What they produced was not a radical departure from existing technology, but rather a synthesis. An extraordinarily disciplined integration of every lesson the British Armoured Corps had learned in 4 years of combat. The hull was welded rather than bolted, which simplified production and reduced the risk of bolt heads becoming lethal projectiles inside the vehicle when struck by enemy fire. The armour was sloped in a manner directly informed by German practice. 51 millimeters at 57 degrees on the glacis plate, which provided effective protection equivalent to roughly 120 millimeters of vertical armour. The turret was cast in a single piece, rounded and thick, with 152 millimeters of steel at the gun mantlet. The gun was the Ordnance QF 17-pounder, the same weapon that had been fitted to the Sherman Firefly and had proven itself capable of defeating Panthers at realistic combat ranges. In the Centurion's purpose-built mounting, it was stabilized in the vertical plane, meaning that, unlike every previous British tank gun, it could lay on a target while the vehicle was in motion. This was not a minor improvement. It was the difference between a tank that had to stop to shoot accurately and one that could engage while advancing, a capability that German armour had largely lacked as well. The engine was a Rolls-Royce Meteor, the same V12 developed from the Merlin aircraft engine that powered the Spitfire and the Hurricane, producing 650 brake horsepower. In a 52-ton vehicle, this gave a top road speed of roughly 35 kilometers per hour, sufficient for operational mobility if not exactly nimble. The suspension was Horseman coil spring, derived from pre-war British practice, which proved durable and easy to maintain in field conditions. 6 prototypes were completed by February 1945. They were loaded onto transporters and shipped to the continent immediately. The 6 Centurion prototypes reached Belgium in late March 1945 and were assigned to the 22nd Armoured Brigade for evaluation under operational conditions. What followed was more demonstration than combat deployment. Germany's armoured strength in the West had, by that point, been effectively broken. The great tank battles at Villers-Bocage, at the Falaise Gap, in the grinding mud of the Reichswald, were behind the Allied forces. What remained was pursuit, encirclement, and the slow, brutal business of clearing a collapsing but still dangerous enemy from defended towns and river crossings. The Centurion crews did encounter German armour, though accounts of actual engagements are frustratingly sparse. What the evaluation teams reported with consistency was the vehicle's handling, its reliability, and the confidence it inspired in the men who operated it. One report noted that crews who had previously served in Shermans described the sensation of sitting behind the Centurion's armour as entirely different. A phrase that, in the understated language of British military documentation, conveyed something close to relief. The gun spoke for itself. In trials conducted shortly after the war's end against captured Panther and Tiger hulls, the 17-pounder in its Centurion mounting achieved penetrations that validated every claim made for it during development. At 500 meters, it went through the Panther's famously resistant frontal armor with margins to spare. At 1,000 meters, performance remained decisive. The psychological dimension, though impossible to quantify, was real. The crews of the first Centurions knew they were sitting in something genuinely formidable. That knowledge changed how they operated. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The obvious comparison is with the German tanks the Centurion had been designed to defeat. And the comparison is instructive precisely because it is not entirely straightforward. The Panther, Panzerkampfwagen 5, was arguably the finest medium tank of the Second World War in purely technical terms. It combined excellent frontal protection, a superb long-barreled 75mm gun, and adequate mobility in a package that weighed roughly 44 tons. Its weaknesses were its flanks, which were far more thinly armored than the front, its mechanical unreliability, particularly in the early production variants, and the enormous logistical demands its complex Maybach engine and transmission placed on German supply lines. Against the Centurion's 17-pounder, the Panther's frontal immunity, which had made it so dangerous to Sherman's, no longer applied. The 17-pounder's APDS round, introduced in 1944, could defeat 130 millimeters of vertical armor at 500 meters. The Tiger I's 100mm frontal plate offered no greater challenge. In protection terms, the Centurion's sloped glacis performed comparably to the Panther's front, while offering superior resistance from other angles. The Tiger II, the Königsteiger, the heaviest German tank to see significant production, was a different proposition. Its frontal armor of 150 millimeters at a steep slope was genuinely resistant to the 17-pounder at long range, though vulnerable at closer distances, and entirely unprotected at the flanks and rear. In a hypothetical one-on-one engagement, the Centurion would have needed to maneuver for a flank shot, a requirement it shared with nearly every other Allied tank of the period. The American M26 Pershing, which entered service in small numbers in early 1945, offered a useful comparison from the Allied side. It mounted a 90mm gun with performance broadly similar to the 17-pounder and carried comparable armor. It was somewhat heavier at around 41 tons and lacked the Centurion's gun stabilization. Both represented the belated Allied recognition that the medium tank doctrine of 1941 had run its course. Where the Centurion surpassed all of them, German, American, and earlier British alike, was in the coherence of its design. It was not a compromise. It was not a stopgap. It was the answer to the correct question arrived at after 4 years of asking the wrong ones. The war in Europe ended on the 8th of May 1945. The Centurion had been present for its final weeks, but had not, in any meaningful sense, been tested by it. That testing would come later, in places the designers at Chobham had never imagined. In Korea, from 1950 to 1953, Centurions of the 8th King's Royal Irish Hussars and the 5th Royal Inniskilling Dragoon Guards fought across terrain that punished tanks mercilessly. Steep hillsides, frozen river crossings, roads that dissolved under armored weight. They proved not merely capable, but outstanding. The mechanical reliability that had eluded so many British tanks of the Second World War was present here in abundance. The gun remained effective against the T-34s and IS-2s of the North Korean and Chinese forces. The armor absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lighter vehicles. In the Sinai in 1956 and again in 1967, Centurions in Israeli service demonstrated that the design's fundamental soundness could survive into a completely different era of warfare. The Israelis, demanding users who maintained and modified their equipment with extraordinary thoroughness, kept the Centurion in frontline service until the 1990s, more than 4 decades after those first 6 prototypes rolled off the transporters in Belgium. Over 100 nations eventually operated the Centurion in some variant or another. It influenced the design of virtually every main battle tank that followed it, from the Chieftain and the Challenger to the Leopard and the M60. The concept it embodied, a single universal tank capable of performing every role, became the standard by which all subsequent armoured vehicle design was measured. Surviving examples can be found at the Tank Museum in Bovington, Dorset, where a production Centurion Mark I stands alongside the machines it was designed to replace and the German tanks it was built to defeat. It looks, to modern eyes, surprisingly modern, angular, purposeful, and somehow still credible in a way that the Shermans and Churchills beside it do not quite manage. Return to that March morning, the crossroads, the idling Shermans, the grey Westphalian haze. 6 weeks later, the war would be over, the flags would come out, and the streets of 100 liberated cities would fill with people who had survived something they had not expected to survive. The Centurion would sit in its depot, unbloodied, waiting for a war that had just ended. And yet the story it tells is not a story of failure, or of tragic timing, or of a weapon built for nothing. It is a story about what happens when an institution finally asks the right question. Britain spent the first 4 years of the Second World War building tanks according to a doctrine inherited from the previous war, refined by peacetime theorists who had never sat inside a burning vehicle, and constrained by manufacturing priorities that always seemed to place tank design slightly below the urgent demands of aircraft and naval construction. The results were machines that the men who drove them respected without quite trusting. The Centurion was different because the people who designed it were finally permitted to build the tank the war had been teaching them to build since 1940. Every compromised cruiser, every undergunned infantry tank, every Sherman that brewed up on a Normandy hillside had contributed a lesson. The A41 specification was the examination answer. It came 6 weeks too late for the war that had demanded it, but it came. And for the next half-century, from the frozen hills of Korea to the burning sands of the Sinai, it kept on coming. The tank that won a war it never fought by teaching every army in the world what a tank was actually supposed to be,